She and Bill have been overseas working for, 3 years now, 4 years? Or more, been more than that?
Just 2 this time.
2 this time, yeah, but you've been over there before. That's what I remembered. And they are in the States for a while to talk about the report kind of on the work and other things, but great people. I believe I'm right to say that Lee was in school with both of them, and she can correct me later on, but I think I remember that. And so if you don't know Bill Bynum, you know Sam Bynum. Sam has preached here a number of times. Bill is Sam's younger brother, and so that puts the connection there. All right, in our what we're doing, Nancy and everybody else, we're going through a reading schedule that we've had. We spend 3 or 4 minutes, sometimes more than that, on our readings. And today we're on this little reading schedule, number 53 through 55. That would be Thursday through last night, which is Numbers, the 26th chapter through the 34th chapter. Numbers 26 through 34. Want to remember to the best of our ability what the major divisions are in each book that we study. The book of Numbers, the name of it indicates the people are numbered. And we have 3 major divisions. The former generation or old generation that had experienced the plagues, experienced the coming out of Egypt and all that. They cross the Red Sea, they come to Mount Sinai. They're there for about a year, and then they go toward the Promised Land. They come to Kadesh Barnea, and what happens? Send out the spies, they return, and 10 of the 12 say, we can't take the land, and so God says, for every day they were gone, you will be wandering a year. So what we have in chapters 1 through 10, verse 10, is basically this old generation. Then 10 verse 11 is when they leave Mount Sinai. And really from 10 verse 11 through chapter 21, we have that generation dies out. Some have called it the tragic transition. We find them coming to Kadesh Barnea, sending out the spies. And then briefly, really from about chapters 15 through 21, we have 40 years that are disposed of. And then they come to the plains of Moab in 2021. And then in chapters 22 through the end, you have the events that occur on the plains of Moab, and you have a new generation. So in chapter 20, let's just pick up at chapter 26. What happens in 26? The people are what? Numbered a second time. That's right. There are 2 numberings. There are 2 generations, really, in the book of Numbers. There are 2 numberings. And it's very similar, very close to the number of people who had come out of Egypt. Now, the ones who are numbered are who? Want to remember?
21-year-old males.
Yeah, above 20 and able to go to war. So the women are not numbered, the children are not numbered, the people who are older and can't go to, they're not numbered. So the first numbering was 603,550. That's in Numbers 146:7. The second numbering, and it's given, the answer is given in verse 51. How many hundreds of thousands are there? 601,730. So you have roughly the same number, but it had been a generation, we would say, that had been what? That's a poor question.
They're not really faithful.
Well, that's true.
Really.
What I was thinking of, it was a generation that had really.
They didn't know Egypt?
Well, that's right. They didn't know Egypt. I guess a poor question. It was a generation that replaced the other. That's what the simplicity of I just didn't make it simple. The generation replaced the other, except for what 2 men? Joshua and Caleb. All right. So then in chapter 27, the law relative to inheritance of property is given, and we have the family of Manasseh is mentioned. Others are mentioned. Then in 28, 29, and 30 are laws relative to what?
Offerings.
Offerings. And then we come to the feast. You're right, we come to the feast in 29. But it's interesting that the laws for the various offerings are given in 28. And you notice you've got the daily offerings. Then in verse 9, what offering? 9 through 10.
So,
The Sabbath day offerings. Then 11 through 15,
month,
the monthly offerings. Then 16 through 25,
Passover,
the Passover. Then in 26 through the end, the day of first fruits, another phrase for
Feast of Weeks.
Feast of Weeks, or in the New Testament, the P word, Pentecost, right. And so then we go to Passover, we got weekly, monthly, yearly, and then we hone in on the seventh month in chapter 29. Whole chapter 29 deals with the seventh month. And really the seventh month of the Jewish year was the beginning of the civil year. And they had a Hebrew word for that. It's interesting. The first day of the week, they issued in the it was accompanied by blowing of what? Verse 2. Yeah, the blowing of trumpets. And then basically 15 days later on the 15th day, or I'm sorry, the 10th day, not 15 days later, on the 10th day, verse 7, is the feast of what? Atonement. Very, very significant to the Jewish calendar. And the priest would go in to the high priest would go into the Holy of Holies with blood, not his own, Hebrews 9 says, and offer for himself first, and then for the errors of the people. And he would sprinkle the blood, you remember, right there before what's that furniture in the Holy of Holies? What's that known, the box-like structure? Ark of the Covenant. He would sprinkle that and make atonement or covering for the sins of the people. And it was a special day. And the seventh month was a special day. It was what we would call fall, September, October, around harvest. Notice this, on the 10th day, verse 7 of the month, that's going to be a holy convocation, holy assembly. Don't do any manner of work. And then on the 15th day began the feast of what? Booths or tabernacles. Yes. And it's interesting here that, again, they were to do no servile work or work that was common to slaves. I think the New American Standard says laborious work. And then it's interesting, on the Feast of Tabernacles was a 7-day feast. And it's interesting that on each day there was a decrease in number of the bulls offered. Look on verse 17. The second day you shall offer what? 12 bulls. Verse 20. The third day, 11 bulls. Verse 23. The fourth day, 10 bulls. Verse 26. The fifth day, 9 bulls. The sixth day, verse 29, 8 bulls. The seventh day, verse 32, 7 bulls. And then on the 8th day, verse 35, there's going to be another solemn assembly. They would do no servile work, and they would make the finish up. These ye shall offer. Now, I think it's interesting here, and you think about things that you don't think about earlier. In verse 39, these ye shall offer unto the Lord in your set feast, besides your vows and your free will offerings for your burnt offerings. These were in addition. I couldn't help but think, when people have the attitude, well, it came Sunday morning, why do I think I have to come? It's almost like, I'll do this, and this is substituting for something else God said. Whereas, I went to every night of that gospel meeting. Why do I have to go the next Sunday? I get it. I work in a skill day, But here, these were all of these offerings they were to bring, and somebody has counted them up as being about 159 animals offered during that time. Those are in addition to the daily sacrifices and in addition to the free will and the vow offerings and all that. So it's just a tremendous number of sacrifices that were offered. Comment, question?
At these feast days, these numbers of bulls and everything were offered by the priests for all the people.
Yes.
It's not each individual coming to,
Right.
to offer 12.
Right.
The number would be, you know,
Oh yeah, not 12 times 600,
If you
yeah,
had
1,000.
600,000 people
Yeah.
offering 12 animals, that
Right.
would be,
Exactly.
that would be a big barbecue.
Yeah, but these were, the 12 offered by the priest for, yes, exactly right. All right, in chapter 30, the laws concerning vows, and here's an interesting thing in verse 2. When a man vows a vow unto the Lord or swears an oath to bind his soul, he shall not break his word, he shall do according to all that proceeds out of his mouth. But if he doesn't vow to the Lord, he does not have to do according to all that proceeds out of his mouth. Is that true?
No.
No, that is not true. In other words, the idea was when you make a vow, and you don't have to make vows, but when you do make a vow, and any vow or oath encompasses Jehovah, anything greater than we are, encompasses the Lord, then you better what? You better keep it. The reason is, not stated here, is you're bringing God into league with you and what you've said. And so you're basically considering God a part of your life. It's interesting in the Sermon on the Mount. You've heard it said before of them of old, thou shalt not forswear or swear falsely, but shalt perform unto the Lord thine oaths. But I say what? Don't what? Don't swear at all. It's not necessary. Does swearing make a falsehood true? No. Does swearing make a truth any more true? No. And so a Christian's word, when he says, yes, this is the truth, no, that's not the truth, that ought to be good enough. Any more than this is of the evil one. Remember that? And so the point on vows is mentioned. In 31 through 33, we have the defeat of what group of people, and then the division of the 31 especially here. The Midianites. And that went back to chapter 25 with Balaam and his counsel. How Balaam at first said, let me die the death of the righteous and let my last state be like his. And yet when he didn't get what he wanted, he caused the people to sin. Look over in verse 16 of 31. These caused the children of Israel through the counsel of Balaam to commit trespass against the Lord in the matter of Peor, so that the plague was among the he caused them to sin. And God looks with severe disdain on anybody who would cause another person to stumble. And so we have that. Then the division of the spoils in verses 25 through 47. And then in 32, we have the Reuben, Gad, and the half-tribe of Manasseh were located where, guys? Easter. That's right. Sometimes called Transjordanic tribes. Now, they had already occupied their land, had defeated some of Sihon, Og, and the others. And so it might be a temptation for them to go ahead and build up their houses and start farming and all that, and then let everybody else who wanted to go on the western side of the Jordan go on, and our best is with you. But Moses said, what you need to do, look at verse 6. Shall your brethren go to war, and shall you sit here? And in essence, what would you be according to verse 37 to these people? A hindrance, a discouragement, yeah. So he made them promise that they would, and then a passage that about everybody knows, who knows anything at all about a phrase in the Bible, sometimes people who don't, down in verse 23, if you look back in verse 22, the land is subdued before you, then afterward ye shall return and be guiltless. That is, you go over here and fight with your brethren. Well, on the map, it would be, you go, here's the Jordan River, you go over here in the western part, you fight all these people, everything's going to be okay, then you come back and build your houses and everything's okay. you're guiltless. But if you don't, verse 23, if ye will not do so, you have sinned against the Lord, and be sure what? Your sin will find you out. Yeah. I've heard that phrase all my life, kind of a warning not to do wrong or think you can do wrong and get away with it. Your sin will find you out. Now, in this particular case, it's interesting that it's juxtaposed next to all this law about vows. A vow is simply a what? A promise. Well, here they promise that they're going to go over and help their brethren. And he says, if you don't, your sins will find you out, and there will be some severe consequences. All right. Then in 33, what we have here is the beginning of a listing of encampments that started in Ramses back in Egypt and goes down to where they are, as well as the death of somebody else down in verse 38. Who do we have? Yeah, death of Miriam, the death of Aaron, and the time is mentioned the 5th month, the first day of the month. That would be the 40th year. And we find out how old Moses was, and we get a little bit of a picture of the difference. Moses is how old when he dies? 120, 39, verse 39. 120.
You said Moses. You said Moses.
Did I say Moses?
Yeah.
I meant Aaron. I'm sorry. David, you said it right to the question. I had the wrong question. How old was Aaron when he died?
123.
123. How old was Moses when he died? 120. And it's right after this time, you know. And so roughly Aaron is about 3 years older. And Miriam was old enough to watch over baby Moses. You know, remember when he was in the ark. So evidently it was Miriam first, and then Aaron and the encampments. In 50, really verse 50, 33:50 through 36 is the final major section. When they go into the land, the last part of 51, when you pass over the Jordan into the land of Canaan, then drive out the inhabitants. What else? Destroy their figured stones, their molten images, their high places, that all deal with idolatry. And ye shall take possession. So destroy them, drive them out. Verse 55. But if ye will not drive out the inhabitants of the land, then shall those that ye left remain, and they will be as pricks in your eyes, thorns in your side. They will vex you. And guess what happened? That's exactly what they did. That's what they did. They subjugated the people, but they didn't drive them out in Joshua. So by the time you get to Judges, God uses what they failed to do as a chastisement of them in the system or the cycle of the Judges. So here's the warning in Numbers. All right, comment, question?
That verse following that is moreover it shall be that I will do to you as I thought you did to me.
Yes. In essence, he would, really I'm glad you brought that up. What is really anticipated there is the retention of the land. And if you don't do what I'm telling you to do, then you will not remain in the land. I'll do to you what I've done to them, drive them out. Yeah, exactly. Great point, Patty. All right, hope you're enjoying the readings. Any other comment or question? All right, let's turn in our booklets. We have come to the last week of the life of Jesus. The last week technically is not 7 days. It's the better part of 10 days, and we're on page 57 of our booklets. You don't have one, do you, Nancy? All right. Let's tell me now what our main. Well, let's just do it this way.
Here's your preparation.
Yes, there you go. Here you go, Dan. 57. All right, so our 17 periods of Bible history all center on Jesus Christ. And really, when you take the life of Jesus in the number of passages given over, the life of Jesus almost centers down or focuses down to what? This time now. the last week, and the events surrounding the death, the burial, and the resurrection of Jesus Christ. So we've had the years of preparation, primarily around Judea, birth in Bethlehem, rearing in Nazareth, and then the beginning of Jesus' ministry began with what event? His baptism, right somewhere right around in here. Then, because he's been doing work all around Judea, he does take a quick trip to Cana, turns water to wine, Capernaum, then back to Jerusalem, cleanses the temple. But then afterwards, John has moved his preaching up to Enon near Salem, which was about right here where my pointer is. And then when down in here in Jerusalem area, when the Pharisees find out Jesus is making and baptizing more disciples than John, he needs to get away from there. But there's a second reason. John has been taken and imprisoned over in Macris because he had told Herod that it's not what? Lawful for you to have your brother Philip's wife. So he has been imprisoned. And so there's a vacuum up in this area. So Jesus goes up through Samaria, and then we have the great Galilean ministry the better part of 2 years. However, people are following him for the loaves and the fish, the Sea of Miracle, the wrong reasons. So we have the periods of retirement or withdrawal, primarily in northern Galilee, Decapolis, and all this area, all the way up to really Caesarea Philippi. And then he sets, Luke 9:51, he sets his face toward Jerusalem. And we have the closing ministry that we just finished Wednesday night. And primarily it's in Judea, Perea, and then we ended it where he was going through the border between Galilee and Samaria. He crosses the Jordan. He's in Perea where he teaches on divorce and remarriage. He receives little children, the rich young ruler, all those things in Matthew 19, Matthew 20. And then he crosses over about where Jericho is, and he healed blind Bartimaeus and his companion. He enters into Jericho and talks with Zacchaeus, and then we have him going on toward Jerusalem in the last week here. Here we have, look at just the chapters, about 8 chapters, the better part of 5 chapters, about 5 chapters, 4 or 5 chapters here, and John in particular. I mean, by John 11:54, we're ended in really 11:55 through chapter 21. Almost half of John is given over to the last week and the resurrection of Jesus. And I mentioned in this note, I've got this in the booklet, but often the Bible covers many years in a few chapters. If you put all the ages together in Genesis 5, it's about 1,656 years from creation to the flood. And here, we've got all of these chapters given to just a few days. So you have the significance of these events seen really in how much divine ink is used on all this. It's due to its being the centerpiece of the Bible story. Events surrounding and including Jesus' death, burial, resurrection compose the very foundation of our salvation, the foundation of the gospel. Let's read that passage. Brother Charlie, 1 Corinthians 15, 1 through 8. I just really want to impress this passage, that the foundation of all we do is based on the good news, the gospel. But the gospel foundation is based on historical events. The very death of Jesus, his burial, his resurrection. It's not a hoax, but these were actual historical events. And so our faith is based on something that actually happened to a real person in a real place. And everything grows out of this. Okay, Brother Charlie.
It says, now I make known to you, brothers, the gospel which I preached to you, which also you received, in which you also stand, by which also you are saved, if you hold fast to the words which I preached to you, unless you believe in vain. For I delivered to you as first importance what I also received, that Christ died for our sins according to the Scriptures, and that he was buried, and that he was raised on the third day according to the Scriptures, and that he appeared to Cephas, then to the 12.
All right, let me interrupt you. The death, burial, resurrection are the building blocks of the gospel. But in order to prove that he was raised, the last thing, really the fourth thing, is what Charlie just read in verse 5. That he what? Appeared. The appearances of Jesus validated the fact that he was raised. How he appeared to Mary and the other women and Peter and others and Paul, last of all, as to, well, keep going, verse 9.
Verse 6. Let me read 6.
Yes, 6 through 8.
After he appeared to more than 500 brethren at one time, most of whom remain until now, but some have fallen asleep. Then he appeared to James, then all the apostles, and last of all, to one untimely born, he appeared to me also.
All right, if we're right on our chronology that Paul wrote 1 Corinthians likely in the spring of AD 58, and he says here, the summer, verse 6, to above 500 brethren at once, of whom the greater part remains until now, though some are dead, some have fallen asleep. In other words, there are people still alive, multitudes of people who are alive who saw his resurrection, and they can vouch for everything I'm saying. So the point we're making on all this is that this part of what we're studying now, all of Jesus' life is important, but this is the event or events to which really the whole Bible story has been pointing. And it's these, it really are, it is or it are. These events, death, burial, resurrection, these events are the events that secure our salvation. Genesis 3:15, you can quote it with me. I will put enmity between thee and the woman. You're not quoting it with me. Between thee and the woman, between thy seed and her seed. He shall bruise thy head, thou shalt bruise his heel. And so we have really in that embryonic form the prophecy that Jesus would suffer, and we're going to see it heightened here with the scourge and so on in the crucifixion. His suffering, his death, but then his resurrection. In that, he would overcome the power the devil had over the grave and make our general resurrection possible, and our the fact that alienated from God because of sins could be done away with. All of that is why it's so significant. Comment, question? David, looked like you had something. Anybody? Richard? All right. Let's do this now. If you would, looking on page 57, I mentioned, and well, I've got it up here too, that the last week of, I've heard brethren say, well, how in the world can you say last week? Jesus is eternal. Well, he is. But what we're talking about is the last week of his earthly ministry. Even in a technical sense, the last week occupies about 10 days. If you look at when he arrives in Bethany, evidently on a Friday afternoon before the Sabbath began at the going down of the sun, and then Saturday he'll rest according to the commandments, and then Saturday night, which to the Jews' reckoning of time would be a Sunday, not the daylight but the evening, he's anointed by Mary at Simon's house, and Judas, we'll hopefully get to that in a moment. Then the day of the triumphal entry into Jerusalem, the day of authority, will be seen, he'll curse the fig tree on the way, it will wither and die, and then he'll go into the temple, and he will overthrow the money changers, cleansing of the temple the second time. Tuesday is the day of debates, teaching, it's a long day, no record on Wednesday. Thursday would be the last day with his disciples, getting the Passover ready. Thursday night, the Passover eaten, the Lord's Supper instituted, then going in the garden, and then Friday, day of suffering. He's in the grave Friday evening or Friday afternoon. Saturday, he's, just to keep the alliteration, the day of darkness, and then we've got the resurrection. So if you count that up, that's roughly about 10 days. And but we call it sometimes just the last week because it's roughly a week. Let's see. We answered in that first paragraph about that only Jesus' earthly ministry is under discussion. Second paragraph, we already dealt with, that sometimes the Bible covers a lot of ground in a few verses. Sometimes it covers very little time in a lot of chapters, as here. Now, to read, Brother Farrell asked me Wednesday night about, I think he was confused on something, and I see why. What I do here is I start a type of an outline of the major events that occurred, best we can tell, day by day. So Friday and Saturday, he arrives at Bethany, he feasts at Simon the leper's house, and during that time, Mary anoints Jesus with the pure nard, and Judas objects to that. And then the day of triumph. So I've got those 2 days kind of outlined there. On the next chart, Wednesday, and then Thursday, and early Friday, I've got it just kind of enumerated here. Then on the next page, I have the events of the trial of Jesus, just one after another. How he's taken before Annas and Caiaphas and so on. And then if you'll notice down on number 10, Pilate reluctantly sentences Jesus to be crucified. I've got an arrow pointing up to the events surrounding the crucifixion because there is so much there. And honestly, it would be great if we could all kind of memorize what the main events that happen around there, because it deals with our salvation. And so the events surrounding the crucifixion of Jesus. And that's just kind of the outline of all the way to there. Then after his crucifixion, and he's in the grave until early the first day of the week, then we have the events of the resurrection, which is a whole nother, the last section here. So what Farron was asking me about is, if you look at the next page, page 59, Friday and Saturday, then he was looking for the day of darkness, I think, from there. So anyway, that is, this last week summarized is basically what I have here. And that's just kind of a summary for anyone who studies. Now, if you go to the next page, 59, then we get to the last week. All right, anybody have any question on anything we've gone over? Yes, ma'am, Patty.
It's not really a question, but as you sit and just dwell on the fact that Jesus is eternal, he has no beginning,
Yes.
he has no end, and he so willingly
Yes.
succumbs to death on the cross so that we can be saved. It is my heart.
It is. The humiliation of Jesus. You're exactly right. I think that sometimes we maybe kind of gloss over that idea. In Philippians 2, Paul talks in the first 4 verses about how we ought to be humble-minded, each counting other better than himself. And then in verse 5, he compares it to what Jesus did. And basically verse 5 and following deal with the humiliation and the exaltation of Jesus. Have this mind in you that was in Christ Jesus, who, existing in the form of what? God. Counted not the being on an equality with God a thing to be grasped, but emptied himself. And that's exactly what you're talking about, Patty. He emptied himself, taking on the form of man, being found in likeness as a man. He became obedient unto death, yea, even the death of the cross. But God highly exalted him and gave to him the name which is above every name, that in the name of Jesus every knee should bow, every tongue should confess that Jesus is Lord, to the glory of God the Father. Those passages, my friends, are so rich. And Patty brought, and I'm glad you did. I'm glad you took an excursion on that. You made me take an excursion on it. Because the condescension of Jesus to leave, I can't help but, I'm just thinking out loud with you. John 17, the first few verses. Father, glorify thou me with thee, with the glory that I had with thee before the world was. Here is the sublime glories of heaven, and as you mentioned, Patty, he was willing to leave that, and not just to come to earth as a man, or be born as a baby and grow up as a man, but as a peasant. And then to be in his ministry humiliated. He came into his own, and his own received him not. Rejected of his own. And the prophetic statement of Isaiah, yet we did esteem him stricken, smitten of God and afflicted. He was wounded for our transgressions, bruised for our iniquities, and the chastisement of our peace was upon him. Oh, the love that brought salvation down. Oh, the love. I got it wrong, didn't I, Landon? At Calvary is the song I'm thinking of. Oh, the mighty gulf that God did span at Calvary. It's unreal. I heard a lesson one time of a fellow trying to, and he made this comment. He said, it's just impossible to illustrate adequately what Jesus did in coming to earth. And he used a Bible illustration that comes close. You remember what happened that God did to Nebuchadnezzar? Here he is a king. He made him to go around, and his nails grew like claws. And he would eat the grass of the field till he would know that the Most High rules in the affairs of men. And here's a king of a nation becomes basically like a dog. And that doesn't even adequately describe what Jesus has done in leaving where he was. And help me out. The love that drew salvation's plan. Oh, the love that brought it down to man. Oh, the mighty gulf that God did span at Calvary. I used to just think that's an old-fashioned song, very little meaning, you know. And man, oh man, the older I get, the more I love that song. Okay, all right. Comment or question? Patty, you bring these things to mind that make me want to share. You know, when we're talking about these ideas, what we're talking about are big, big principles of the Bible. The big things that overarch really all of it. And it is so helpful. Okay, so he arrives at Bethany. And Bethany is going to, if you look down here, this is basically Jerusalem, the Kidron Valley, the Mount of Olives, and the road from Jericho to Jerusalem. And Bethany is about a mile and 7/8 from there. And so Jesus has come from Jericho to Bethany, and he's going to lodge there, likely Friday night, and rest on Saturday. So on our notes on page 59, let's read with me, if you would, page 59. After the resurrection of Lazarus, and to avoid the Jewish plot already laid against his life, Jesus traveled to Ephraim, a city variously estimated from 8 to 20 miles north of Jerusalem, and about 4 or 5 miles northeast of Bethel. He and the apostles would have mingled with the multitudes there as many made their pilgrimage to Jerusalem. Eventually, he traveled east over the Jordan River into Perea, taught on marriage, received little children, taught the rich young ruler as well as the apostles. Crossing the Jordan, he came to Jericho, where he healed the 2 blind men, met with Zacchaeus, taught the parable of the pounds. We talked about that Wednesday. Now the time is right. He is going to Jerusalem for the last week. His lodging for the evenings was in Bethany, approximately 1 3/4 miles from Jerusalem, on the opposite side of the Mount of Olives, possibly in the home of Mary, Martha, and Lazarus. Geography helps understand the chronology at this point. The road from Jericho to Jerusalem is about 18 miles long and is a considerable incline. I've told y'all about that when we went on a tour over there, and we went from Jericho, a large portion of the freeway, and it was a freeway. We were in a bus, a standard, travel bus, And the best way, it reminded all of us who were around Birmingham, when you intersect Highway 31 and I-65 down there in Vestavia, you know where I'm talking about, kind of the foot of the mountain, and you go all the way up toward Alford Avenue, y'all remember how that huge, that just great incline, it was almost like, I'm back in Birmingham. When we were going from Jericho, it was like that kind of an incline that you go up from, so you get an idea. It's a large climb from being below sea level to being about 2,500 feet above sea level. It would have been a continuous uphill walk of about 6 hours. Faithful Jews would not have made such a trip as this on a Sabbath. However, we know that the day after Simon's feast was Jesus' triumphal entry. So John's chronology puts the feast Simon gave on a Saturday night, 6 days before the Passover. A quick view of Jesus' schedule would be like this. He and his apostles made the trip from Jericho to Bethany on a Friday before sunset, rested Friday night before Saturday, then sometime after Sunday on Saturday, Simon gave the feast that we now study. All right, we got about a minute. Let's read the end of John 11, and we'll probably have to stop there and pick up with the feast Simon gave Jesus Wednesday night. John 11. All right, 54 through the end. Kirsten, if you would, John 11, 54 through 57.
Jesus therefore no longer walked openly among the Jews, but went from there to the region near the wilderness, to a town called Ephraim, and there he stayed with the disciples.
All right, now before we go on, that really dealt with the time earlier in the closing ministry, you know, but 55 is where we really want to, if you wanted to bracket verse 55, it might even, do some of your translations have the beginning of a paragraph in 55? Okay, all right, 55 through 57.
Now the Passover of the Jews was at hand, and many went up from the country to Jerusalem before the Passover to purify themselves. They were looking for Jesus and saying to one another as they stood in the temple, "What do you think, that he will not come to the feast at all?" Now the chief priests and the Pharisees had given orders that if anyone knew where he was, he should let them know so that they might arrest him.
All right, now I want to back you up to verse 53, everybody. I know it's a little bit earlier, but if you're just reading through John, the point John makes is they're not just wanting to take him to imprisonment, but to do what? To kill him. Right. All right. 2 questions here. Since the Passover was at hand, many went what? Up. And that deals with the altitude. Purification was necessary because of ceremonial uncleanness. The statements of these verses seem to be a type of all points, APB, so to speak, that the Sanhedrin made. It can be deduced by noting John's emphasis in that preceding paragraph and mentioning the council, Caiaphas, chief priests, and Pharisees. What was their purpose? Well, verse 57, to take Jesus, but then in verse 53, to do what to him? To kill him, right. And that indicates that the Jews in general must have understood that their religious leaders wanted Jesus badly. Such meant that certain dangers surrounded Jesus every day of the week. All right, we'll have to stop. I did want to take some time kind of introducing this last week, and we did. But Lord willing, we'll get on Simon, the former leper, and his feasting for Jesus Wednesday night. Last comment or question?